So if you think history is just, something locked away in museums and textbooks, you're actually missing the most important archive of all.
Right, your own DNA.
Exactly, your DNA, because we usually treat history like a settled account, right? Like a story that ended way before we even arrived.
Yeah, that's the standard way we look at it.
But today, we're pulling from this deeply moving piece in Psychology Today by David Bures that completely upends that notion.
It really does. It's a fascinating read.
Yeah, it examines the intersections of Holocaust Remembrance Day, so Yom HaShoah, and the very real science of transgenerational trauma.
Which is such a massive topic.
It is, and our mission for this deep dive is to explore how the biological realities of inherited trauma, combined with this really disciplined philosophy of courageous optimism, can provide a roadmap for us.
A roadmap for transforming generational burdens into, well, profound strength.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this.
So it requires a fundamental shift in how we view the past. I mean, we have to recognize that the experiences of our ancestors didn't just shape the culture we were raised in.
Right.
Those extreme environments actively calibrated the biological systems we rely on to navigate the world right now.
Right, to literally survive today. And to ground this massive abstract concept, the author starts with an incredibly tangible visual.
The framed letter.
Yes, the letter. Behind his desk, just hanging on the wall of his office, is this framed letter. And it's the very last piece of correspondence his great-grandparents wrote to his grandfather.
Just days before they were captured.
Yeah, days before they were sent to perish in the Dachau concentration camp.
Having that artifact looming over a modern workspace, I mean, where you're answering emails and checking phone calls, it creates this staggering juxtaposition.
It really does. You're typing an email and looking at Dachau.
Right. And that piece of paper is a literal bridge between a life about to be violently extinguished in Europe and a new lineage beginning in America.
What?
And keeping it in his daily line of sight ties perfectly into the broader framework of Yom HaShoah. The placement of that specific day on the calendar is highly deliberate.
Yeah, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, they chose the 27th of Nisan back in 1951.
Yes.
And if you look at a Hebrew calendar, that date falls exactly 1 week after Passover.
Which is, of course, the ultimate psychological and cultural celebration of liberation from bondage.
Right.
So by placing Holocaust Remembrance Day just 7 days later, the architects of this observance forced the proximity of liberation and absolute catastrophe into the exact same breath.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly powerful.
It serves as this temporal, cyclical reminder that freedom is incredibly fragile and unimaginable loss is, always hovering right at the edges of recent memory.
And the survival stories from the author's own family map perfectly onto that razor-thin line.
They really do.
Like, he details his grandmother's experience right after Kristallnacht. When the remaining Jewish homes and businesses were shattered across Nazi Germany, she and her family had to flee on foot.
On foot across Europe.
Literally walking until they reached Le Havre, France. And they managed to board what turned out to be the absolute last ship out of Europe before the maritime doors completely closed.
Just a story of miraculous timing, but driven by this relentless, desperate agency.
Yeah.
And what makes the author's relationship to these events so instructive is how he interacts with that framed letter we talked about.
They're the one in his office.
Because he doesn't utilize it as an open wound. He isn't keeping it on the wall to continuously inflict secondary pain upon himself. He views it as a physical mandate.
A mandate dictating that he does not have the luxury of giving up.
Precisely. He looks at that final letter and internalizes a very specific logic.
Which is?
Well, because his great-grandparents endured such horror, and because they died so terribly, languishing in his own life is unacceptable. Their destruction demands that his life be driven by clear, actionable purpose.
Man, that mandate to live a life of purpose isn't just a heavy psychological framework, though.
No, it's not.
It's actually written into our biology. Which, moving from the psychological tone of a family into the physical body, brings us to a massive leap in how we understand inheritance.
It's a huge leap.
Because we all conceptually understand, picking up on the unspoken rules or anxieties in a household. Like, when your parents are stressed.
Sure. Environmental factors.
But the data shows the body literally inherits the history itself.
And this is where the bridge from history to clinical biology becomes undeniable. The initial clues emerged from demographic observations back in 1966.
Yeah, that Canadian clinic data, it completely upends our standard timeline of trauma.
It really broke the mold.
Right, because psychologists operating out of these clinics in Canada analyzed their patient demographics and found a massive statistical anomaly.
A huge one.
The grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, so a demographic 2 full generations removed from the actual event, they were overrepresented by 300% in psychiatric referrals compared to the general population.
Yeah, and a 300% overrepresentation cannot be written off as just, environmental parenting styles.
Right, it's too big of a spike.
Exactly. A grandchild who never saw a concentration camp shouldn't be experiencing baseline mental health crises at triple the normal rate, not unless the trauma somehow bypassed standard environmental conditioning and altered the biological hardware.
Which means we have to look past the DNA sequence itself. Because we used to think that DNA was a locked vault, right? Like a fixed blueprint you get at birth, completely isolated from what happens to you during your lifetime.
Yeah, that was the prevailing model for decades. But the mechanism responsible for this generational transfer is epigenetic inheritance.
Epigenetics.
Right, which is deeply documented in journals like Biological Psychiatry.
Yeah.
The genetic code, the actual sequence of the DNA remains unchanged.
Okay, so the sequence is the same.
But the expression of that code is heavily modified. When an organism experiences extreme, prolonged trauma, the body adapts by attaching chemical tags, specifically methyl groups, to the DNA.
And these tags, they act like volume knobs for certain genes.
That is exactly the right visual, yes.
Yeah.
In the case of severe trauma, these epigenetic tags turn up the volume on the genes that govern the HPA axis,
Which is what, exactly?
the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Hmm.
It controls your body's stress response and cortisol production.
Oh, I see.
So the parent's body realizes it is in a lethal environment and alters its genetic expression to stay hypervigilant. And those chemical tags, those volume knobs, turned all the way up to 10, are then passed down to the offspring.
Man, it's almost like inheriting a smartphone where previous generations installed a bunch of hypersensitive security apps that constantly drain the battery,
Yes.
Like, you didn't download the apps yourself. The actual hardware of the phone is perfectly fine, but you're still the one who has to figure out how to manage the fact that your system is constantly scanning for threats and exhausting your daily energy reserves.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize the metabolic cost of inherited trauma. The software settings were heavily modified by the previous user to survive an extreme threat environment.
Yeah.
So when the author uses the metaphor of being handed trauma-filled bags that we didn't pack, this is the biological reality of that metaphor.
And the tragic part is the people who handed us those bags didn't tack them either.
No, they didn't.
They just carried them. Because survival didn't leave them any room to unpack. Like when you are desperately walking across Europe to catch the last ship out of Le Havre, your nervous system is solely focused on staying alive until tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Processing the trauma is a luxury reserved for peacetime, and they never really got to experience that peacetime.
What's fascinating here is the dual nature of this epigenetic signal. Because in clinical settings, we often pathologize this inheritance as a pure biological burden.
Right, like it's just a defect.
Exactly. It creates a heightened vulnerability to stress, an overactive nervous system, and that 300% spike in psychiatric referrals. But it also passes down remarkable adaptive capacities.
Wait, really? Adaptive capacities?
Yes, the exact same biological tweaks that leave a descendant vulnerable to a panic attack in a safe environment are the identical mechanisms that gave their ancestors the razor-sharp situational awareness to survive a death camp.
Oh, wow. So the inheritance is a double-edged sword. You receive the baseline anxiety, but woven into that exact same genetic tag is the absolute grit and resilience forged in those horrific fires.
Right.
You are biologically built by the survival of your ancestors.
That's because the human organism is incredibly efficient. It doesn't pass down pain just to cause suffering. It passes down pain as an instruction manual for survival.
That makes total sense.
The challenge for the descendant is that they are reading a wartime survival manual while trying to live a peacetime life.
Which begs the obvious question. If we are handed these hypervigilant genetic settings, how do we biologically or psychologically override them?
Yeah, how do we turn the volume down?
Right. No one wants to drag a heavy, battery-draining bag around forever. And this is where we have to look at the framework of Viktor Frankl.
Ah, Frankl, yes.
We all know his background surviving Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Dachau, losing his wife, his parents, his brother. But what's vital here is the specific psychological methodology he pulled out of that darkness.
Which the author describes as courageous optimism.
Yeah, and I do have to push back on the terminology here, though.
Oh, really? Why?
Well, when I read Courageous Optimism, it stopped me in my tracks. Because using the word optimism when discussing Holocaust survival feels almost painfully naive.
Hmm, I see what you mean.
Right. It evokes this modern, toxic positivity, expecting sunny weather, ignoring the horror, pretending everything happens for a reason.
Right. If we were using the greeting card definition of optimism, you would be absolutely right. It would be insulting.
Exactly.
But Frankl's concept is entirely divorced from blind cheerfulness.
Uh,
Courageous optimism is a disciplined, grueling, active choice.
Active choice. Okay.
Yes. Frankl observed that the inmates who sustained themselves didn't do so by pretending the camp wasn't a nightmare. They survived by immersing themselves in a purpose that transcended the camp.
They locked onto a reason to outlast the suffering.
Exactly. They envisioned a piece of scientific work they needed to finish, a child waiting for them in another country, or a story that the world desperately needed them to tell.
They had a future target.
Right. And the author frames this disciplined approach as a trifecta: moral will, moral skill, and courage.
Breaking that down, moral will is the baseline desire to find a meaning. Moral skill is the actual cognitive ability to apply that meaning to your current brutal reality.
Yes.
And courage is the endurance required to hold on to that meaning when every single external input is trying to strip it away from you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this trifecta forms the absolute foundation of logotherapy.
Which is the school of psychology Frankl founded.
Yes. Logos being Greek for meaning. The core tenet of logotherapy is that human beings are fundamentally driven by the search for meaning. Not just the pursuit of pleasure or the avoidance of pain.
Right.
We don't just exist as passive receivers of our environment or our biology. In every single moment, even when our only remaining freedom is choosing our attitude toward unavoidable suffering, we possess the agency to decide what our existence will be.
Man, it is a heavy realization, but an incredibly empowering one. It means the epigenetic bag is heavy, yes, but you retain the ultimate executive control over what you do with it.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really interesting. If courageous optimism and logotherapy provide the method for handling the bag, what is the actual goal?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because in modern therapy culture, we constantly talk about the goal being resilience. We just want to bounce back to normal. But the author brings up Nassim Taleb's concept of antifragility.
Right.
And he argues that returning to normal is the wrong target altogether.
Taleb's distinction between resilience and antifragility is vital when dealing with generational trauma. We often use the terms interchangeably, but they are completely different structural concepts.
How so?
Well, think about a plastic cup. If you drop it, it shatters. It is fragile.
Right, it can't handle the stress of the impact.
Now think about a titanium cup. If you drop it, it might dent slightly, but it holds its shape. It survives the stress intact. That is resilience. It resists shocks and stays the same.
Okay.
But Taleb argues that there is a third category: systems that actually require stress and disorder to improve.
Require stress.
Yes. The human immune system is the perfect example. If you isolate the immune system from all germs and stressors, it weakens. It requires exposure to pathogens to learn, adapt, and upgrade its defenses.
Oh, I see.
So the immune system isn't just resilient, it is anti-fragile.
It grows stronger because of the trauma, not in spite of it. And applying that to the author's grandparents makes perfect sense. They were the epitome of an anti-fragile system.
Absolutely.
He notes that they didn't just survive the Holocaust as victims who barely made it out. They emerged as victors.
Because attempting to be merely resilient to snap back to the people they were before the war was a mathematical impossibility.
Their previous world was gone.
Entirely incinerated. They had to take the sheer disorder, the unimaginable pain, and use it as the raw fuel to build a completely new, vastly stronger psychological architecture.
Yeah, he describes his grandfather arriving in America to build a new life with literally nothing but that single letter in his pocket from the parents he would never see again.
Unbelievable strength.
And his grandmother, the one who navigated the escape to Le Havre, she raised her children on a foundation of gratitude so fierce the author says it bordered on defiance.
Defiant gratitude.
Defiant gratitude. That isn't just being thankful for a sunny day. That is looking at the history that tried to exterminate you and aggressively utilizing joy to prove that they failed.
It is the absolute highest manifestation of logotherapy, lived out daily. I mean, the author even jokes that his chicken farmer grandparents couldn't spell logotherapy, but they embodied its core principles better than anyone.
That's amazing.
And to tie this back to the biology we discussed earlier, this anti-fragile, defiant growth is exactly what the biological adaptive capacity looks like when it's properly harnessed.
Wow, right.
They didn't just pass down the trauma-induced hypervigilance. Their behavior actively laid down new epigenetic markers of defiance, gratitude, and structural growth.
So what does this all mean? How does this synthesis of historical tragedy, epigenetic science, and Frankl's philosophy translate into everyday actionable reality for you, the listener, who might be trying to manage your own inherited hypersensitive security apps?
Well, we can look at how the author himself operationalized these concepts. Because he didn't just write a theoretical essay about his family's history.
No, he physically lived out the mandate.
Exactly. For more than 20 years, he served as a police officer. He took the inherited bone-deep knowledge of what happens when evil is allowed to go unchecked, and he forged that biological hypervigilance into a career of standing on the front lines to protect his community.
He weaponized the trauma for good,
Yes.
and that calling evolved even further when he retired from the force. He now dedicates his work to helping protect other police officers from the severe trauma they endure in the line of duty.
It's incredible.
He looked at the heavy bag of his family's history, unpacked it, and converted the weight of it into a highly specific, actionable mechanism to help others process their own psychological burdens.
Which culminates in what is arguably the most piercing insight in the entire article. He writes, "Remembrance without transformation is just grief."
Remembrance without transformation is just grief. Man, that reframes everything we are taught about historical memory.
It acts as a direct challenge to the listener. Yom HaShoah, or any act of remembering personal or historical trauma, fails if it is merely an exercise in feeling sorrow. The generational obligation isn't to carry the pain, like a sacred relic, and wallow in it.
Uh-huh.
The obligation is to rigorously examine the pain, extract the logotherapeutic meaning from it, and then pass those bags forward to the next generation, significantly lighter and more profoundly useful than they were when you received them.
It totally redefines a phrase we hear constantly. Whenever we discuss the Holocaust, the operative phrase is always "never again."
Right.
And usually we interpret that passively as an instruction to never forget what happened. But through the lens of epigenetics and antifragility, the author stretches that definition.
He does.
Never again doesn't just mean never forget. It actively means never stop growing.
It is the ultimate biological rejection of the victim mindset. By choosing courageous optimism, you are claiming executive agency over the history that tried to destroy your lineage.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by staring at a framed letter from Dachau, grounding ourselves in the profound historical tragedy marked by Yom HaShoah. We moved into the literal biological reality of the Canadian clinic data and epigenetics, understanding how the severe stress and the elite survival skills of our ancestors are chemically tagged onto our DNA, modifying our stress responses today.
Exactly.
And finally, we explored how the empowering frameworks of Viktor Frankl's Logotherapy and Nassim Taleb's Antifragility give us the precise tools to override those biological settings.
The overarching takeaway for every listener is a reminder of profound agency. I mean, none of us were consulted on the history we inherited.
Right, we didn't pick it.
None of us chose the biological or psychological bags we were handed at birth. But regardless of the severity of that inheritance, we all retain the absolute, unbreakable ability to dictate what that history means for our future.
Think about a heavy bag of family history or inherited stress you've been carrying. If the science of epigenetics proves that alongside that vulnerability, you've also inherited the exact biological grit required to transform that weight into a unique, anti-fragile strength, what is one small way you could start unpacking that bag today to make it lighter for whoever comes after you?